Welcome to the Produce on Purpose podcast, where we experience life being the real you. I'm your host, Randy Adkins Jr., author, teacher, speaker, preacher, and lifelong learner. I'm excited about this conversation today. We have Mr. Goodman, Lion Goodman, with us, and he is ready to have a conversation. Welcome to the Produce on Purpose podcast. How are you today?
Thank you, Randy. I'm great. I just completed a 4-hour class that I'm doing for the state government to help social workers learn how to use my methodology to help their people in poverty, to help get them out of poverty sooner. So I'm really excited about this project we're involved in.
Well, awesome. Well, you've had quite a myriad of experiences in your life. One of them was an extremely impactful one, which I would love for you to talk about to start us off. You had a near-death experience of being shot in the head 4 times, and I want to understand how has that incident shaped your perspective and gotten you on the path to where you are today?
It's a great question. It's now become a famous story. Even a film was made about it. It's been published widely. It's called A Shot in the Light, because when I was shot, I actually went into the light, not in the dark. So I was 26 years old, a traveling salesman, traveling around in my van, which was built out like an RV, and covering the Southwest from Colorado to California. And I was on my way from Las Vegas to California, and I stopped to help a guy whose car had broken down in the middle of the Mojave Desert. It was about 110 degrees outside. And so I was a good Samaritan. I stopped. I said, can I help you in any way? And he was kind of staring into the engine of his car, not knowing what to do. And he said, I don't know what to do. I've just put $200 into her and she won't start now. And I said, well, I'm heading into LA. Do you want to ride? And he looked at me kind of funny and he said, yeah, okay. And he brought his duffel bags and suitcases and boxes into my van, which was already pretty crowded. And I started driving and he was kind of weird. So I thought, well, I'll just drop him off, somewhere in LA. But we ended up traveling together for 3 days. I was buying him food because he didn't have any money, and I was giving him clothes that would make him look better, and showing him some of the books that I liked, and kind of took him under my wing. And it was good to have a traveling companion. I'd been traveling by myself for a long time. And I grew to trust him, sent him on errands, got the van washed up or gassed up. And then we'd move my boxes of jewelry and gift items in and out of the van, which is what I was selling at the time. And the third night out, we were parked out east of LA. And I was in the back of the van moving things around because it was quite crowded. So I was kind of making room in the back cabinets. And he was in the front of the van listening to music. And suddenly there was this explosion, this loud explosion, and something hit me in the head. And at first I thought the gas stove had exploded. And I looked up and the gas stove was intact. And then I looked to my left where he was, and there he was with a gun pointed at me from the front seat. Now, I had obviously anyone would be shocked to suddenly have someone shooting at you, and so my first words were like, "Are you shooting at me?" It's like it didn't make any sense to me. I'd been being nice to him, and then he shot again, and I realized he was not just warning me, which was my first instinct, that he was going to kill me. Now, time gets stretched out when you're in one of these experiences. So I don't know how much time there was between the 4 bullets he shot. But during that time, I did quite a bit of inner work because first I had to say, all right, I'm stuck in this position. I can't defend myself. He has a gun. He's 12 feet away. His hand's propped up. I knew physics, and I knew that I was going to be dead soon. Well, I had to decide, how do I want to die? Do I want to die angry and upset and pissed off, or do I want to die in peace? And I realized I wanted to die in peace. So I began praying, and I also thought, well, if I'm going to be dead soon, I want to clean up my past. So I did kind of a fast reverse movie reel of my life, and I forgave everyone that had hurt me, and I asked forgiveness from everyone that that I had hurt. And again, I don't know how long that took, but that was between the second and third bullets. Third bullet, the second and third bullets missed me by fractions of an inch. I later pried them out of the wood cabinet to my right. Uh,
Mm.
and and at this point, I went, okay, I'm coming home, God. And so I just kind of reached up to what I called God, but other people might call the light or spirit or whatever, and said, I'm ready to come home. And I was in a peaceful place. I was filled with love and light. Just like, okay, I'm ready to come home. I, cleaned up my life, and I was surprised because I was only 26 years old. It didn't make much sense, but I had been thinking about my future, and I really couldn't figure out what my future was going to be. And
Yeah.
suddenly it made sense. It made sense that I couldn't figure out my future because I didn't have one. So I'm in the bliss, and then pretty soon I'm out of my body, looking down at the van where these two little people are having this little drama, going, "Oh, that's interesting," and ready to verge with what the big whatever it is. And the fourth bullet rang out, and suddenly my head was pushed violently to the side, and there was all this blood rushing out. And
Mm.
I thought it was strange because I was back in my body, and I knew I was supposed to be out of my body. So I was kind of surprised to find myself back in my body, aware of the blood, aware of my body in this crouched position, and I realized that I was still intact. I wasn't dead,
Mm.
and so I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to die, I at least want to look my assassin in the eyes because I was perpendicular to him. And so I kind of lifted up my head and I turned and I looked at him, looked in his eyes, and he freaked out. He jumped up and he said, "Why aren't you dead, man? You're supposed to be dead." And I said, I didn't have a good answer for that question. I didn't know. And
Mm.
I said, "Here I am." And he said, "This is too weird, man. It's too weird. It's just like my dream this morning." And I went, "What dream?" And he said, "I dreamed I was shooting at this guy, but it wasn't you, it was somebody else, and he wouldn't die." And I thought, okay, who's writing the script? Why didn't I get a copy of the script? And am I going to get paid at the end of this movie? Like, that was that was the thought. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. But here I
Yeah.
am, here I am in the middle of this thing. And I thought, okay, so how can I manage this situation? Like, there's a crazy person with a gun pointing at me and telling me he had this dream uh, where he was shooting a guy. And so I thought, if I could talk him down from his adrenalated state, I might survive this. And so I used a very soft, quiet, and controlled voice. And he kept saying, "Why aren't you dead, man? You're supposed to be dead. I shot you 4 times, man." And I said, "Maybe I'm not supposed to be dead." And he said, "Yeah,
Wow.
but I shot you. I shot you." And he was jumping around, looking out windows. We were in the middle of nowhere. Nobody would have heard it or come if they had.
Yeah.
And so I just quietly talked to him, just being really soft and quiet. And he eventually kind of settled down, and he kind of came over to me, and he looked at my head because I was covered with blood, and he said, "Does it hurt?" And that was the moment I thought, okay, he's now caring about me. He's gone from wanting to kill me to caring. That was a you know poignant moment. And I said, it hurts, but I think I'm okay. And he said, "Okay, man, I'm going to take you to a hospital that I know." And I said, "Okay." I thought that was a good idea. But please, yes, that would be nice. So he kind of put boxes around me so I couldn't jump out and get him. I wasn't in any condition to do so, but he put boxes around me, and then he got in the front of the van and he started driving. And I had I think about a half an hour of driving where I was just thinking, trying to contemplate this, like what just happened. It was so
Right.
confusing, and this is one of the signs of trauma: is it's confusion, pain, you know, impact, on the
Hmm.
system. But confusion is one of the main parts of trauma. And so I'm just kind of contemplating, like, oh, why didn't I die? What am I doing here? What's going to happen next? And so I was in the back of the van in the dark for about a half an hour. And finally, the van pulled over and stopped, and he turned the engine off. And I knew we weren't near a hospital because there were no bright lights.
Right.
there was silence. And a few minutes later, he walked back to the van with a gun in his hand, and he sat down on the bed right next to where I was crouched in. And he said, "I can't take you to the hospital, man. I have to kill you." And I said, "Oh, why?" It's good to be curious. And he said, "Because if I take you to the hospital, they'll put me back in jail. I can't go back to jail, man." And I thought, okay, not only is this a crazy person with a gun, it's a crazy ex-con with a gun. So kind of elevated the issue. And I said, well,
Wow.
maybe we could figure something else out. I won't turn you in. He said, "No, I can't trust you, man. I can't trust you. They'll come and get me." And so that began an 8-hour conversation. And at one point, I said, "I'm in this crouch position. I've been there for hours." And I said, I'd like to get up and stretch." He said, "Okay, don't try anything funny." I went, "Don't worry." So I got out of the van, and he sort of pointed down to a pond that was down a hill from where we were parked. And I walked down, and he was walking behind me. And I thought, well, he could shoot me in the back and push me in the water, but I felt intact. I felt like superhuman in some way, because
Mm,
I'd been connected to God's source light, and it was still in me. I was still
right.
that light, right? So I kind of washed off my face and washed off my hands, the blood and stuff. And I stood up and I turned toward him. And he looked at me weirdly and then held the gun out and said, "What would you do if I handed you this gun?" And I said, "I'd throw it into the water there." And he said, "You wouldn't shoot me? You wouldn't try to kill me?" I said, "No, I've got my life. You've got yours. We're okay." And he looked at me and he said, "Man, you are the weirdest person I've ever met." I thought, "Yeah, probably, I'm probably the weirdest person you will ever meet, you know." So, so
My.
more conversation ensued. We finally found a way to let each other go. I would not turn him in. He would not. I would not report him. He would let me go. And so we drove to a place that he knew. He took his stuff, including the gun. I drove myself to the hospital and got my scalp sewn up. Two bullets had grazed me, had bounced off my skull.
Wow. What an amazing story. That's just one of those things that it seems like you were in a place that anyone would just probably just freak out and say, "What in the world just happened?" And all of the thoughts and all of the feelings that you could end up having. And it sounds like this particular experience has gotten you to a place where you are. So it sounds like you had decades to think about, research, look at what is it about consciousness and awareness and who we are, and what is that discovery from what you've kind of gone through allowed for you to say, okay, what about human nature now that has now influenced the work that you have?
That is a perfect question because it really did re-stimulate my research on what is the nature of human nature, what is the nature of human psychology, who are we, what are we doing here, why are we here, why do we keep hurting each other? Long list of questions. And I had actually been studying consciousness in college. I had graduated with a degree in consciousness studies. This was in 1975, which will give you an idea of how old I am. And so then this thing happened a couple years later, and then I dove back into the study of consciousness. I took more than 100 workshops and trainings looking for those answers, read books, followed gurus, listened to everything I could, and I learned a lot about our nature. I learned a lot about our inner life, our inner psychology, and I was particularly interested in the question of how do we change, because I saw lots of techniques being used to create change, but most of them were temporary or partial. You
Mm-hmm.
say affirmations for a while and you felt better for a few minutes and then you kind of went back to your old self. Or you did take a yoga or workshop or a training or one of these beat on the pillow workshops or something, and you felt better for a couple of days, but then you were back to your old self. And I was trying everything. I was kind of eclectic, like, yeah, I'll doing a workshop, sure, I'll come. you know? And so, but over that period of time, and by the way, during that time, I also became a headhunter, which is kind of ironic, having my head hunted and then becoming a headhunter, but
Mm-hmm.
that's my life. And so I spent 25 years in executive search, and that's what I was doing for a living. While I was weekends and nights, I would go do weird things with other people who were also doing weird things. But all of that. all that study and trying to understand, I finally came to a deep understanding of the mind.
Mm.
And because I studied psychology, philosophy, the sciences, neurology, uh, everything I could get my hands on, I got an understanding and I realized that at the core of the mind are beliefs. And a lot of people have other names for these things. They call them paradigms or schemas, or, there's lots of words for it. But the simple word is beliefs. We form beliefs in childhood to try to understand the world. When I cry and make a fuss, mom comes and takes care of me. Now, that's a
Right.
baby's belief, but and it's pre-verbal. They don't have words, but that's what we'd call it. They make connections. And so at the core of the mind are beliefs. It's like the infrastructure of the mind, the same way that neurons are the infrastructure of the brain. And if we could change those beliefs, we could
Hmm.
change everything. We could change the fundamental mind that you have. And the beliefs are like lenses that we look through and see the world. So if I believe life is hard, what I
Hmm.
look around through that lens, I see all the hard parts of life. If I believe life is joy, if I could change the lens, change the sunglasses from green to yellow, I could see joy everywhere. So
Right.
those are the fundamental core beliefs of how do we see ourselves? How do we see other people? How do we see the world? And so these core beliefs are the ones that I teach people how to change.
And that's I like how you described it as different lenses because the life that we're living is just not being just everything's not just experience, is really truly what we're focusing on and what we are looking at in a particular moment. I always think about I go by a red car and I just start seeing a lot of red cars. It's like
Right.
I've put on the lens for the red car.
Yes.
And the question becomes then, if is it as easy as just changing the lens that I'm looking at this life in to begin to change, because we have science to back that there's neuroplasticity, that we can change, that we can make differences in our lives. Is it just as easy as me changing the lens from joy to, or from, sadness to joy, or how does that work?
So the answer is yes, it's that easy if you have the right tools.
Yeah.
So most tools create temporary results. And so you have to keep using the tool over and over and over again. And most people that teach you how to change your beliefs say, well, you know, just move the other belief aside, take on the new belief and pound it out, pound out like a jackhammer. And eventually the old belief will go away. Problem is it doesn't. It's always there. So what I discovered is that if you clear the old belief first, and
Hmm.
really clear it out. And I'll explain that in a minute. Then when you put in the new belief, it's like a garden. If you're going to build a garden, you want to get the rocks and the weeds out of the soil first. And then
Hmm.
you plant your seeds. You don't throw seeds on rocky, weedy ground. Well, we've all got rocky, weedy ground in there with thousands of beliefs about ourselves and others in the world. And so if you try to change your beliefs on top of that rocky, weedy ground, not much is going to change. So you keep
Right.
pounding on it is the idea. That's what most neurologists will say. Well, you just have to do the thing over and over and over again. Not with my methodology. And this is where I made my breakthrough, is that we have technologies to clear the belief completely from the mind, disappear it. It's no longer there. And then when you plant the new belief, then it can grow, flower, blossom, and fruit. So,
Right.
but it depends on the technology.
And it's interesting because I love to talk about, sometimes you talked about in your story, having to you did forgiveness and you began to let go. There's this power that we have and this ability that we have to maybe even release some of the relationships and things that we've created, patterns we've put together. So my question goes into your clear beliefs method that you have, and what's so way that you are describing that we would be able to begin to clear out that garden that we have sometimes in our mind, so that we can be in a place where we can now add and put new seeds into that ground, as I would call it.
My favorite question. Thanks, Randy. Good setup for me to talk about my work. Uh, first of all, the underlying principle is that our experience is multidimensional. Right now, you're seeing, feeling, hearing, smelling, sensing, intuiting. You're in an environment, so you got environmental influences, you got your past, and so you are a unique being, and you're having a unique set of experiences that are just yours. Nobody else could have them, and it's multidimensional all the time. So now, most of our consciousness is focused on our eyes or our ears, and so we're not sensing where our body position is all the time. If you lose your balance, you start focusing on that. But all of that information, the body's like a information superhighway. But as it comes up through the spinal cord and into the brain, there's this thing called the reticular activating formation, which kind of filters all the information and just lets through the things that we need to be aware of. And that's a thing called the task positive network in the brain. So when we're focused on a task, we can put all our attention on it and be successful at it. There's another part of the brain called the default mode network, which is when you relax, you daydream, you meditate, and you go, okay, I don't need to do anything right now. I just need to be, or I just need to feel. And these two networks are opposing each other. So if you're in a meditative state, it's really hard to get anything done. And if you're getting something done, it's real hard to be aware of other parts of your body, like is your body sensing something, right? So, because beliefs are come from experience, beliefs are also multidimensional. They're conclusions that we came to from our experience. So, beliefs have their root not just in the mind or the verbal mind, which is what most people think of beliefs
Mm-hmm.
as mental constructs. They're actually multidimensional constructs. They have feelings. They have actions. They have choices involved. They have thoughts. They have sensing involved. So when you're trying to clear a belief, you have to get into its multidimensionality, which means you have to use the default mode network more than the tact positive network. You kind of have to use them both. And so we guide people on inner journeys uh, in order to get them to re-experience the original thing that caused the belief to form. So, for
Um,
example, your dad beats you, and you come to the conclusion, I must be bad because otherwise I wouldn't be being beaten. That core belief is in there in that multidimensional matrix. And we take a person back into their history, into that memory, and we change the memory. In psychology, this is called memory reconsolidation. And it's about a 10-year-old science where they understand how memory works. Memories are consolidated. You can deconsolidate them, change them, and reconsolidate them. So that's one of the techniques. We teach 20 different methods for changing beliefs because it's a whole tool set. If I'm working
mhm.
with you, if all I have is a hammer, you look like a nail, right? And a lot of people, a lot of techniques have or one thing that they do to everybody, and sometimes that works. Most of the time it doesn't. We have 20 different tools that, depending on who you are, what your issue is, where you are in your life, we bring out a different tool and work it to get to that core belief, clear it multidimensionally, and then it's gone. I'll give you a quick example. I was working with a psychotherapist who was very successful in her life. She had great family, great practice, but she had this haunting thing in her that she said, I always feel like something bad's going to happen. She tried everything. So she came to me and she said, You're supposed to be the subconscious pattern detective. Work with this, get rid of this. So in one session, we cleared it. And I checked in with her about 2 months later and I said, How are you doing? She said, It's amazing. I've been carrying that thing around my whole life. And in these past 2 months, it hasn't even come up as a thought. She said, Wait a minute. No, it did. About a week ago, I thought something bad's going to happen. And then I realized, Oh, I don't believe that anymore. And I went on with my day. So that's the kind of impact we're looking to have, is that deep, profound shift that opens the person, frees them from the past, which allows them to see through a new lens.
That's awesome. And you brought up something that I had read, that you call yourself the subconscious pattern detective. Now, how do you balance that and you're a healer of the psyche when you're helping somebody in coaching practice to be able to, um, get to what they're needing in that moment?
Well, first of all, I'm very aware of labels. I teach about labels, and we're always labeling things and people and events and all that. So labels are just labels. They have no meaning to me. They're just sticky notes that you put on. I am a healer. I am a teacher. I am a husband. I am a wife. So I don't bother with labels. This is what other people call me. But what I do is I'm there with my client 100%. I give them all my attention. I'm listening to them, getting to know who they are, their issue, their pattern that they want to clear, the thing that's in their way. And then I bring out one of my tools and I use that and it's gone. And then they have a different life from that point forward.
That's awesome. And the work that you do with executives and leaders, what are some of the common beliefs that you found that usually hold them back from really reaching that full potential that they should have when they're leading or doing whatever they're supposed to be doing, their life purpose in life?
I was teaching about that this morning. When we all have a core wound, something that wounded us as children, and it's usually a negative self-belief, like I'm a piece of crap, or I don't deserve to live, or I'm a bad person, I'm a sinner. There's all kinds of deep inner core beliefs. But then we create these adaptive strategies to make sure nobody finds out that that's who we are. And this is the first mask we wear. So one of the things that, one of the very successful adaptive strategies is I'm going to be perfect. If I'm perfect, nobody will notice that I'm really a piece of crap. Or I'm going to achieve. I'm going to be better than everybody else. Or I'm going to accumulate more toys than anybody else. Or I'm going to be friendly to everyone and people will like me. Or there's a long list of these adaptive strategies. So in the leaders that I work with, the CEOs that I work with, I'm interested in what that first core belief was that caused them to push themselves up to rise into their leadership position. Now, leadership has been described in many ways, but you have to have a lot of grit and a lot of determination to become a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's a natural force. Sometimes we just come in with it. You can see it in kids sometimes. But often it's an adaptive strategy for something deeper that's a wound. And so when I'm working with a CEO and I find that that's true, then I ask them, would you like to explore this thing that's pushing you so hard to be who you are? And if they say yes, they don't always, if they say yes, then I can help them clear that wound out. And then their natural self comes out. Suddenly they're not the pusher. They are the natural leader. They're not the, I got to do it all perfect. They're the, hey, I'm human and I can make a mistake once in a while. They're not, I'm the CEO and you are my underling. They're like, oh, you're a human being. I'm a human being. Let's have lunch. You know,
Right.
so there's a shift in persona and personality. And of course, persona comes from the Greek meaning mask. So we wear these masks of personality. And often the mask that's on the outside is the person I'm pretending to be.
Right.
Underneath that mask is the person I'm afraid I am.
Mm-hmm.
And underneath that mask is who I really am. So I help people find that true self, the truth of themselves. And when we can open that up, that's a beautiful thing because we're made of these beautiful qualities: love, compassion, interest in others, interest in life, curiosity, imagination, playfulness. These are the child qualities that we all admire and lose along the way.
I love that. Of course, and when you look at my Produce on Purpose book, I have a mask on the front and describe and talk about that. And you talk about those layers of mask because it does cover who we really are. Want to shift a little bit as we're getting closer and closer to our time. What role
No, no, I
does
need more time.
I know. What role does gratitude play in clearing your limiting beliefs and also creating a better reality for who we are and what we're doing?
There's something about gratitude that's, first of all, it's a virtue. It's a virtue at its core, which is to be grateful for what we've received. I studied the path of the Huichols, who are an Indian tribe in southern Mexico. And their philosophy is nature gives us everything. What could we possibly give back to Mother Earth? We can give our thanks. So it's called sacred reciprocity. It's like, well, I will give thanks to the mother for giving me food. I will give thanks to the mother for giving me water to drink. So there's this kind of interaction with the larger universe, the larger world. And that's really the core of gratitude, is just recognizing I'm lucky to be here. Someone just said that scientists calculated, like, what are the odds that you would become you in this life? And they did all the calculations of genetics and parentage and did your parents, where did your parents come from? 1 in 400 trillion. That's the
Yeah.
odds that you would become you. So you are a sacred being. You are like a unique being. I'm a unique being. We're all that way. And so when we can see the world in that way, it's natural to say thank you. Like, wow, I didn't create all this. This was all pre-created. I came into it. And no matter what the circumstances are, I can recognize that life is a gift. That's why they call it the present. So
I love it. And the idea as you were talking about that, I go back to one of the areas you were when you talked about the lenses. I often think that when I'm gracious and I have gratitude, that it actually allows for me to put on a different lens to what I am experiencing every day and what I'm going through. So if I'm grateful for what's happening versus trying to look at all of the issues or the problems or the things that are going wrong, if I'm grateful, I begin to see the world differently, and potentially is that lenses those lenses we were talking about and the focus may even change. What are your thoughts on that? Because I do feel that the more grateful I am, I see the world and I see my interactions differently.
well, you said it so beautifully. I don't know that I have anything to add. So it's true that the lens of gratitude, it's actually a wider lens than we usually walk around with. We walk around with these sort of narrow lenses of, like, I have to go to work, I have to go to home, I have to be a dad, I have to do that. And we forget that there's this whole world out here. And
Right.
I study history, I study philosophy, I study everything I can because I want to understand the world, not just my little piece of it. So
Yeah.
it really is an expanding lens that you're looking through and seeing the greater reality that we exist in, that, we could bow down and say, thank you. It's like, thank you for this life. Like, it's hard. It's not, nobody said it was going to be easy. I didn't get a contract that said you will have an easy life, so none of us do. We have to go
Yeah.
through the hard stuff, but, thank you for the lessons. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and as we've talked about belief, and I would like to hear your take on the connection between beliefs, consciousness, and the creation of a sustainable and thriving planetary civilization that we should have here. How do you see that coming together?
Okay. Do you have a couple hours? That's a big question. I'll give it my best shot. In how many minutes? I got a couple of minutes to answer that.
Few more minutes, yes.
Okay. All right, good. You like asking tough questions. I get that. Uh, so first of all, as I said, beliefs are the infrastructure of the human mind. And there's a new book out called The Soul, A History of the Human Mind, by a guy in Australia, a historian. And it's this thick. I've gotten a bit about this far into it. But he says all of history is based on beliefs. Everything in history you can understand happened because of people's beliefs, which I like because I'm a belief guy. So beliefs are at the core of our personal relationships. They're at the core of how we relate to the world, who we are, our identity and our personality, what we value, our choices, our behavior. They are underneath everything. So if we're going to have a better life, we need to clear the beliefs that are in the way, that are causing confusion, that are causing resistance and pushing against each other. We often have conflicting beliefs in us, like I want to lose weight and I want to eat that cake in the refrigerator, right?
Hmm.
So we're full of complications and contradictions. We have to learn, we have to become known to ourselves. We have to look inside ourselves and see what we're made of. And when you do, you also see what other people are made of. And then you recognize that that's just another me over there. We're really one being. I think we're one mind. We're like each have a little tiny piece of mind, but that it's part of one mind. And then you're in reverence and awe and wonder, and you're asking a different question. Instead of how can I make the most money, before I die, it's how can I contribute to the world? How can I make the world a better place? Because I want to take care of all my brothers and sisters and my entire family. And what do I need to do that? So that's when your purpose opens up.
Hmm.
Your true purpose comes into play because you're thinking about something larger than yourself, because you are larger than your original self.
Yeah. Wow. I love it. Yes, we have gotten to the end of this conversation, which has just been so awesome. And, the combination and the connections there. What would be the one or two things you would tell someone that they should take from this conversation and start today to begin to change and transform their lives and be able to produce on their purpose in their life based on what you know?
The point I like to make is that if you're unhappy with yourself, examine your beliefs. If you're unhappy with other people, examine your beliefs. If you're unhappy with the way the world is, examine your beliefs. That's the place to start. Because when you get to know your beliefs, you get to know your own mind, you get to understand how it works, and you can change it from that place. If you don't know you're in prison, you can't escape. If you don't know your mind, you can't change it. So that's my advice. And in my ebooks that I offer, I have a process called belief self-diagnosis, which is a exercise to do to begin diagnosing your beliefs in all the areas of life. And so that's my giveaway. It's like, yeah, start by examining your beliefs. That's a good place to start because then you can say, I don't like how that one's affecting my life. I think I want to change it. And now you've got an opening.
Wow, Lion, this has been an awesome conversation, and I appreciate the time that you've taken to explain each of the areas. How can my audience get connected with you, find out more about what you're doing, and just know, hey, I want to make some changes to my beliefs. What can I do?
Well, the best website is liongoodman.com. It's Lion, liongoodman.com. That kind of has threads to all my other websites. If you want to clear your beliefs, go to clearyourbeliefs.com. That's a good one. And if you're interested in my training, I train people all over the world, everyone from doctors and social workers to therapists and coaches. That's clearbeliefs.com. So those are my three websites, and they're all interconnected. So you'll go to one and you'll find the other two.
Well, Lion, thank you so much for being such a wonderful guest. I have definitely learned quite a bit today about really taking and examining those beliefs that we may have. You want to have a difference in your life, you want to have a change in your life. You definitely should. I love the analogy of the garden. I'm going to use this for my days and talking to anyone is, hey, if we got a garden, I've got a bunch of rocks, I got a bunch of weeds. I need to clear it out first. And yes, it is something that needs to happen first before I put new seeds in there. Because if I drop new seeds in a garden that has a bunch of other stuff in it, it's probably not going to grow really well. And if we do that in the consciousness of our mind, who we are, what we're wanting to be, we can make those differences and those changes. And I am definitely grateful that you were able to share that with the Produce on Purpose audience and everyone. Take a look at what Lion is doing and making sure that you can go to a place where you can begin to clear those limiting beliefs that you may have, or look back and go to a place where you can now start to change your life And we want to make sure that we are going in a path where we can have transformation. And most of all, that we are becoming the authentic us. And I love the layered mask that you talked about. Of course, that's what I talk about in my book, that we can remove those masks in our lives and become the real you. And most of all, that we all will produce on purpose.